Hello, I'm Alon Burstein, visiting assistant professor in the Department of Political Science and Israel Institute Fellow at the University of California, Irvine, here to bring you the summary of the last 24 hours of the Israel-Hamas war. It is currently the evening of January 24th, 2024 in the United States, the morning of January 25th, 2024 in the Middle East. Starting with the hostage situation, there's still no indication received in Israel regarding whether or not the medicines that were part of the medical deal actually did reach the hostages. We are now a week after the medical deal. Israel has reportedly been pressuring Qatar in order to come up with some validation that the hostages did in fact receive the medicines. This was given in assurances that Prime Minister Netanyahu personally handled. However, there's still no indication reported. Other news, the Wall Street Journal reported today that Egyptian sources stated that Hamas officials told the international mediators that they are open to discussing releasing all the women and civilian children that they are still holding in exchange for a meaningful pause in the war. This refers to, according to how Hamas treats civilian children, this refers to 19 hostages. These are the women and the children that are under fighting age, i.e. under the age of 18. However, at this point, that is all speculation. No reports have been made that this is part of the negotiations. There have been many reports throughout the day regarding the report that was given yesterday in Reuters that there is broad agreement between Israel and Hamas on the parameters of a hostage deal that will include a month-long truce and a phased release of hostages in exchange for Palestinian prisoners. Most of the reports throughout the day, both sides, Israel and Hamas, actually denied any such progress. However, there were other indications that there may be still some progress, but both sides are not trying to make this public. Among these, El Miaden, which is a Hezbollah affiliate in Lebanon, quoted sources in Hamas quoting that there is a clear progress on the ceasefire talks in Gaza, but they are very initial. Hamas insists on the immediate and swift aid to the humanitarian situation in Gaza, as well as rebuilding the Strip and releasing prisoners. So in that indication in El Miaden, Hamas is not saying that they're holding out for an all-out ceasefire, but instead that they are holding out for other conditions. However, Usama Hamdan, who is a Hamas representative in Lebanon, was interviewed in Sky News in Arabic, and there he stated, again quoting, Hamas insists on a complete and comprehensive ceasefire and the evacuation of all Israeli forces from the Gaza Strip. Israel is not serious about an agreement. There have to be guarantees to any agreement, and these have to be international and regional guarantees. And he added that the talks are in very initial stages. So he is sticking to Hamas's original claim that there in fact has to be a complete ceasefire and otherwise nothing to talk about. Similarly, officials in Israel also stated the negotiations are very initial. These were quoted on the Wine news agencies saying there are very large gaps and no movement in negotiations yet. It is very complicated. The reports that Israel and Hamas have agreed in principle on ceasefires is not true. Hamas is always toughening its positions, and we cannot fool anyone. It will take a lot more time. Related to all this, U.S. Special Envoy to the negotiations, Brett McGurk, arrived in Qatar today after he was in Egypt yesterday to continue facilitating the negotiations. Washington Post published details about the developing deal, stating that the negotiators are discussing the different stages that hostages will be released. According to what it says in the Washington Post, Phase 1 will include the release of 10 women and children that were due to be released in the previous deal. Stage 2 will include 40 hostages that are wounded and sick or elderly, as well as female soldiers. And Phase 3 will include all the male hostages, soldiers, and the bodies of different hostages. In each phase, Israel will release increased amount of Palestinian prisoners, including the most heaviest prisoners, i.e. indicating possibly Marwan Barghouti. Responding to all this, Finance Minister in Israel and head of the religious Zionism party, Bezalel Smotrich, demanded the convening of the expanded cabinet in response to all of these leaks, stating, stopping the war at this sensitive security and diplomatic moment could endanger the entire campaign. Stopping the war for a long period is not something we will be a party to. We promise nothing but victory. Moving on to the ongoing fighting in the Gaza Strip. No rockets and mortars were sent in the last 24 hours, which is somewhat indicative of the last several days. There have been either no rockets or very few rockets sent every day. Regarding the ongoing fighting in the Gaza Strip, in the northern parts of the Gaza Strip, in Jabalia refugee camp, there were again reports of bombings targeting specific residential areas, several Palestinians killed. This is important to note because in the north, the IDF is continuously pulling out its troops, and these bombings are not the same style bombings that occurred in the initial invasion of the Gaza Strip or in the southern parts of the Gaza Strip right now. They are much more targeted bombings, which match what Israel has promised to actually dial down and move to phase 3 of the fighting, which will be much more focused and low intensity fighting. In theory, these bombings do not violate that. However, they are still targeting different residential areas, and Palestinians are reported killed today in Jabalia refugee camp. In the central parts of the Gaza Strip, the IDF reportedly destroyed a tunnel that went underneath the Wadi Azza River, connecting the southern parts of Gaza City to the northern parts of El Bureij refugee camp. A weapons cache was discovered near the tunnel, including anti-aircraft missiles, rocket launching equipment as well as warheads, and the electronic components of rockets. The tunnel was reportedly over a kilometer long, very fortified, and was destroyed. Another IDF activity in the Nusirat or Netzarim line, a Hamas lookout who was preparing to fire an IDF unit was attacked with armored division and killed. There was also continued fighting reported in El Bureij and in El Nusirat refugee camp. Moving on to the southern part of the Gaza Strip, in Han Yunis, is ongoing intensive gun battles reported throughout the day, including those involving armored division as well as air bombardments. The IDF reportedly raided several Hamas outposts, uncovering weapons warehouses, including RPG missiles. The IDF also emphasized that each one of these raids includes a preliminary targeted airstrike to pave the way for ground soldiers. Al-Qassam brigades, that is the military wing of Hamas, reported targeting 6 different IDF armored vehicles in Han Yunis, including tanks and D9 as targets, with the Yassin 105 RPG missiles. These are locally made RPG missiles. Reportedly, these are the ones that were used yesterday and 2 days ago in the different attacks in the Netzarim line. One of these attacks killed 21 IDF soldiers. In addition, in the El Fukhari area of Han Yunis, Al-Qassam reported attacking IDF soldiers in a gathering area, publishing a video showing that the IDF soldiers were in fact injured. In addition to this, we're also reporting that fighting continues in and around the Nasser hospital. Nasser hospital is within the area the IDF is called to evacuate. The hospital administration is saying there are a lot of patients, including dialysis patients, that cannot evacuate, and fighting is intensifying in and around the hospital. In Rafah, dozens of people were reported killed and many injured in a bombing in the eastern area of Rafah, specifically noting the bombing that occurred in the Omar bin Abdulaziz Mosque in the area. Other news related to the Gaza Strip. An UNRWA facility housing internally displaced people in Han Yunis was hit by 2 tank shells, killing reportedly 9 Palestinians and injuring 75. This came under very heavy condemnation by the United Nations, the World Health Organization, and different international actors. The U.S. State Department also expressed grave concern over the attacks of UN compounds, saying that humanitarian workers and civilians must be protected. Other news, the Saudi Al Arabiya network reported that the Egyptian Foreign Ministry stated there are ongoing efforts to bring about a ceasefire in the Gaza Strip, but Israel is mounting impossible conditions on this, and that Israel is forestalling any possible agreements. Defense Minister in Israel, Yoav Gallant, stated today in relation to the idea of a possible hostage exchange, Hamas is in great distress. It does not have enough ammunition, people, reserves. It cannot investigate how to fight or take care of its wounded or govern. He added that while Hamas in Gaza wants a pause in the war, indicating that the pressure that the IDF is mounting on Hamas is working, those that are forestalling it are Hamas leadership abroad, signaling specifically Ismail Haniyeh, Khalid Mashal, and these types of leadership that are located in Qatar that are forestalling the agreement. I will add that while Yoav Gallant stated this in a gathering of soldiers, all other sources are suggesting that Yahya Sinwar is actually the one who will make a decision if there will be a truce and a hostage exchange, and most of the sources are suggesting that he right now is not interested in any hostage exchange or a ceasefire as of this moment. Regarding casualties, no IDF soldiers reported killed in the last 24 hours, leaving the number of IDF soldiers that were killed in the Gaza Strip since the invasion began at 221. 18 IDF soldiers are reported injured in the Gaza Strip in the last 24 hours. The Palestinian Health Ministry is reporting 210 Palestinians were killed in the last 24 hours in the Gaza Strip, bringing the total number of Palestinians that were killed in the Gaza Strip since the war began to 25,700. 63,740 Palestinians are reported injured in the Gaza Strip, and there are still several thousand that are reportedly buried under the rubble and presumed dead. Moving on to the humanitarian situation in the Gaza Strip, International Red Cross Committee stated today that the Gaza Strip is facing complete medical shutdown as a result of attacks in hospitals, inability to get to wounded, and specifically also the lack of electricity to different medical facilities, leaving them reliant on generators and fuel that can often not get to them. They stated that unless emergency acts are taken, there is a complete medical shutdown that is going to occur in the Gaza Strip. Italy announced today that 100 children from the Gaza Strip will be evacuated for medical treatment in the country. It did not specify what is the mechanism, who will be the 100 children. It didn't make that announcement, however. Egyptian President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi stated today, seemingly in response to Israeli statements from weeks ago that Egypt is the one that is holding up aid, he stated, I'm quoting, "Egypt is not the reason aid for Gaza is held up. Rafah crossing between Egypt and the Gaza Strip is open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, but Israeli procedures that allow the trucks to enter forestall the process." He added that this is part of the way they apply pressure with regards to hostage release. In this, he is contradicting the statements made recently by the IDF humanitarian officers, stating that as much aid as anyone wants could enter the Gaza Strip. Israel is not forestalling it. In fact, the problem is on the Gazan and Egyptian side. I will add that the President of Egypt's statement that Rafah crossing is open 24/7 and anything can flow in does not match up with different reports from the UN and different Palestinian organizations. Other news, ongoing evacuation of people is seen from Han Yunis towards the Rafah area, where estimates are roughly 1.5 million internally displaced people are now crowding the streets of Rafah and the El Mazi refugee camp. In addition, there's more reports of Palestinian civilians that are trying to make their way back up north since they feel that it is no longer safe to even be in the southern parts of the Gaza Strip. However, they are being denied their ability to go back up north by the IDF. The IDF has blocked the roads up north on the Nesarim or Nusirat line, is not allowing any civilians to go back up north. A total of 106 trucks entered the Gaza Strip today. Importantly, only 9 out of the 60 scheduled trucks entered through the Kerem Shalom crossing as a result of the fact that there were substantial protests in Israel against the entrance of humanitarian aid. Protesters specifically calling out that no humanitarian aid should be allowed to enter the Gaza Strip until the hostages are released. The protests lasted over 7 hours and physically blocked the entrance of trucks going through Kerem Shalom, and thus only 9 out of the 60 scheduled trucks entered through the Kerem Shalom crossing. Moving on to the West Bank, substantial IDF activity was reported in several different areas of the West Bank. However, surprisingly, there was very little information regarding what happened in these different raids. IDF activity was reported in Jenin, where substantial clashes were noted and several Palestinians were injured. There was also IDF activity reported in Arabe, several neighborhoods in Ramallah, several of the outskirts of Nablus, the Al Fawar refugee camp in Hebron, Beit Jafar in Bethlehem, as well as Zaita in Tulkarem. However, once again, there were no reports made about how many Palestinians were injured or were arrested in the last 24 hours. Likely those numbers will come in tomorrow. Moving on to the northern parts of Israel, southern parts of Lebanon. There were rockets and missiles sent from Lebanon targeting the northern parts of Israel, however a lot less than in recent days. Anti-tank missiles were fired at the Shomra area and at Kibbutz Yiftach in the western Galilee, and there were unconfirmed reports of an interception of drones above the Rumim mountain ridge in the northern parts of Israel. Regarding IDF retaliations, similarly, there were a lot less reported than in recent days. Al Miyadin reported an IDF attack in the Yarun village, and Al Manar reported artillery fire in the Alavona village. However, there were no casualties reported. Unclear what was specifically targeted. The IDF did not indicate this either. This is one of the lowest intensity days, at least according to reports, up until now. Moving on to the regional developments. Following yesterday's attack in which the United States carried out several raids and aerial bombings against different pro-Iranian militias in Iraq and on the border between Iraq and Syria, Al-Hashad al-Sha'abi, which is an umbrella organization of a lot of pro-Iranian militias, reported one operative was killed in these attacks and 2 were wounded in the Al-Anbar area of Iraq. In addition to this, both Reuters and CNN reported that the United States has officially begun negotiations with the Iraqi government about a withdrawal of U.S. forces from the country and establishing bilateral relations. So when the war started escalating and more attacks were happening in Iraq, the Iraqi government stated that it is going to demand that the U.S. evacuate its troops. The Pentagon did not officially respond, however. It did say that no such request was made. According to these reports, the U.S. ambassador in Baghdad has begun these negotiations. The process may take several months or years, but the process has reportedly started. Moving on to the Yemeni front, a Houthi spokesperson, Yahya Saria, stated today that the Houthis attacked two U.S. destroyers with ballistic missiles in the Gulf of Aden and in the Bab el-Mandab Straits. While he claimed direct hits against the U.S. freighters and the U.S. ships had to change course, the U.S. Army reported that the missiles that were sent were intercepted by a destroyer, and other reports also suggested that the other ships that those destroyers were escorting continued on course. Other news, Sky News in Arabic reported that the Iranian Revolutionary Guards recently asked the Houthis to stop having planned meetings in defense ministry offices and intelligence compounds out of fears of assassinations and different coalition attacks. So this means that as far as the Iranian Revolutionary Guards are concerned, the coalition attacks are not only going to increase, but they may move to the form of targeted assassinations, which will be another escalation in the conflict between the coalition and the Houthis. Moving on to some of the political and general trends in the last 24 hours, thousands of people protested across Israel today, demanding that the government advance a hostage deal, even if this comes at the expense of stopping the war. In addition to this, there was a rare protest seen in the Gaza Strip, near the Al-Aqsa hospital of Deir el-Balach, where several dozen people were seen demanding to return home, and one sign was also called to release the prisoners, referring to the Israeli hostages, if this means that the people can return home. This protest was echoed by the IDF and Arabic news sites. It was also seen in Al Jazeera and other places. According to at least some of the videos, it seemed like several dozen people. However, this is the first such protest that is seen in the Gaza Strip since the war began. Other news, the International Court of Justice, the ICJ, announced it is going to publish its decisions regarding the injunctions that South Africa asked for on Friday at 2 o'clock. The South Africa had asked for 9 injunctions, including complete cessation of the war, an acts to preserve evidence and allow commissions of inquiry to enter the Gaza Strip, orders to compel Israel to report on its actions and implementations of injunctions, orders to ask Israel to report to the court every week about its actions in the Gaza Strip, and things like that. The court is going to publish its decision Friday at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Importantly, the court does not only need to publish its decision regarding the injunctions that South Africa asked for, the court is also allowed to impose its own injunctions. Even if it denies any of the injunctions that South Africa requested, it could impose its own injunctions in regards to the war. In Israel, according to reports, the government has not decided how it is going to respond. It is going to wait to see what the court says. The way the procedure works, after the court issues its rulings, these will be handed over to the United Nations. The ICJ is officially the judicial arm of the United Nations. There, if Israel does not abide by any of the injunctions, it will be handed to the Security Council to impose force upon Israel to abide by this. This takes the form of sanctions. It remains to be seen what exactly is going to happen. Other news, Iranian President Raisi met Turkish President Erdogan in Ankara today. The two discussed the relations between the country and reaffirmed their support for Palestine, and both stated that they support Iran's efforts in fighting both Israel and U.S. terrorism in the region. Other news, British Foreign Minister David Cameron met in Israel today with Prime Minister Netanyahu and Israeli Foreign Minister Israel Katz, as well as the family members of different hostages. Foreign Minister Katz asked David Cameron to use his time in Qatar, where he's traveling next, to pressure them on a hostage release and to ensure the medicines did in fact reach the hostages. Other political news, there was major political turmoil throughout the day regarding the relationship between Prime Minister Netanyahu and the Qatari government, as well as the government in Egypt. Prime Minister Netanyahu was recorded in a meeting with families of hostages, stating, and I quote, "Pressure has to be applied on those who can apply pressure on Hamas. First and foremost, Qatar. Now, when I speak about Qatar, you don't hear me thanking Qatar. Have you noticed I don't thank Qatar? And why not? Because Qatar is no different than the UN. It is no different from the Red Cross. In some ways, it is even more problematic." He added, again quoting, "I have no illusions about Qatar and Hamas. They fund them. And I am very angry lately, and did not hide this from the United States, who renewed their contracts for military bases with Qatar. Why didn't you ask to bring hostages home? That's the meaning of pressure." Responding to this, spokesperson for Qatari Foreign Minister Majid al-Ansari stated, quoting, "If the statements are true, the Israeli Prime Minister is only obstructing and undermining the negotiation process, for reasons that seem to serve his political career, rather than prioritizing saving innocent lives, including Israeli hostages." Responding to this, Israeli Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich, and leader of religious Zionism, stated, quoting, "Qatar is a state supporter of terrorism and a funder of terrorism. It is Hamas's patron and is largely responsible for the massacre against the citizens of Israel. One thing is clear, Qatar will have nothing to do with what happens in Gaza the day after the war. While this is important, this is just diplomatic blows. However, this is a very critical moment where Qatar is playing a vital role in the negotiations between Israel and Hamas. In Qatar, a statement did come out saying that Qatar is not going to let any personal feelings or animosity towards one person obscure its role in negotiations. However, bad blood between the politicians is not likely to facilitate good movement on negotiations. In addition to this, it was reported today that the Israeli National Security Council has been trying to arrange a conversation between Prime Minister Netanyahu and Egyptian President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi. However, the Egyptian side is not responding. The two have not spoken since June last year. There are constant negotiations between the two countries regarding the Philadelphia line and different security negotiations. However, again, we're seeing that there's seemingly bad blood between Prime Minister Netanyahu and Egypt. Egypt is the other main negotiator in the side. Again, this does not mean that negotiations are not going to go well. Prime Minister Netanyahu is not the one who is sitting in the negotiating tables. However, this probably does not facilitate good news for ongoing negotiations at this moment. That is my report for the last 24 hours. I'll be back tomorrow.